I'm really honored to be giving you a quick introduction on the forest birds. And I thought I would start with thinking about how do you become a Hawaiian forest bird, which isn't very easy. And the first thing you have to do is fly a really, really, really long way, because Hawaii is extremely isolated. It's the most isolated landmass in the whole world. So if you're a colonizer, then you have to make this trip thousands of miles from the nearest continent. And so that explains why we don't have many large-bodied animals and why we don't have mammals that can't fly or swim, right? We have the monk seal and the bat. And why we have a lot of birds and a lot of insects. The second way you become a Hawaiian forest bird, if you are able to make this flight, and so you are an ancestor of all the birds that are here today, you arrive and you're fit enough, you're going to enjoy your new and unique home, which is amazing for you as a bird because you don't have any mammalian predators. You have very little competition from other birds and other animals, and you have very few diseases and nest predators. And so if you're a Hawaiian honey creeper, you diverge rapidly. So you diverge from your ancestor, which is this finch here in the middle, to 27 different species. And these species have new morphologies. They're able to utilize this new environment and new life histories. So that ranges from maybe you're nectivorous, so you're feeding on the nectar in flowers, or maybe you're eating seeds or insects, or you're just a generalist and you eat everything. And so what we see here is that some of these strategies have also evolved in other places. You know, they're not the same species, but they're the same approach to life. Like, hey, I'm a generalist, I eat everything. You know, or hey, I focus on nectar. But then we have some approaches are unique to Hawaii. And so one example of that is the Akiapola owl, which has this double-tooled bill. So it uses this like stout, strong lower mandible to hammer into wood, kind of like a woodpecker would on the mainlands. And then it uses its upper mandible as a way to sort of extract insects. So that's something that hasn't evolved in other places anywhere in the world. So Hawaii's avifauna is extremely unique. And not only the honey creepers, right? There are other species that made it here that maybe diverged less amazingly, or maybe didn't diverge much at all. For example, the Elapaio, or the Nihoa miller bird, or this is a juvenile Puaiohi, or the amazing Hawaiian crow, which is actually a raven, the Alala. And then the third thing, once you're here and you have evolved and you're continuing to evolve into this amazing array, and humans arrive, and so your next thing that you have to do to be a Hawaiian forest bird is survive in this novel landscape that humans have created that are full of mammalian predators, diseases, other competitors. And so that has led to this mass extinction and the reason that we're sitting here today. There were 142 known bird taxa, not just the forest birds, but all the birds, you know, the moa nalo that Rylen mentioned, or the other rails. There were 142 known taxa, 95 went extinct after the arrival of humans, and 33 of the 44 remaining taxa being like species or subspecies, are listed as threatened or endangered. And so here's another way to look at that. 42% went extinct before 1977, another 20% by the 1950s, and then as Rylen mentioned, in our lifetime, we've lost 9% of the species. You know, and that's not happening many other places in the world. This is unique. Of the species that are persisting, 27% are endangered or threatened, and then only 2% are considered to have healthy populations. This is a dire situation. It's truly dire, and it's calling for novel and innovative conservation tools. and this is definitely one of them. You know, we do it in our restoration activities, in the way we attempt to control avian diseases, and we need to do it in terms of the people that we're able to reach. You're not going to care about a Hawaiian forest bird if you don't know anything about it, and having a symphony, you know, is a way to reach people we wouldn't normally be able to reach with a message like this. Okay, and then just a few other general characteristics of forest birds for people who aren't bird nerds and might not know. One of them is that only males sing. The males sing to defend their territories and to attract a mate. Hey, listen to my song, it's so complex, I am so hot. And then also to kind of get the group synchronized and ready to breed. Many of the species are single island endemic, so they only live in one place. And then many of the nectivores are important pollinators. Rylen touched on this, but just another way to illustrate it. As with many endemics in the Hawaiian Islands, the land birds co-evolved with elements of the flora. So you can really see that here, right? This is an extinct black mamo, which you're going to see, Molly's going to show you, and it's crazy. And this is one of the lobelioi flowers in the genus Trematolobelia. So this bird sticks its bill down here, uses a brush-tipped tongue to get nectar out of the bottom. Meanwhile, the business parts of the flower up here, where the pollen and the stigma that receives pollen is, touches the forehead. When that bird goes to another flower, it transfers pollen.
And what's the status of that?
I don't think is it listed? Trematolobelia? I feel like it's not listed, but all of the lobelioids are in huge trouble. And I actually participated in a study on this one, and the EV can still pollinate this. So the bill is long enough, but.
There are other ones though that went extinct that are in the collections here. So we didn't plan on showing you guys those today, but if you wanted to see the plant, smash plant.
Yes.
Pressings. Yes. The plant pressings. To be able to see those extinct flowers, they do have those in the Bishop Museum collection, so you can see those.
Yeah, so obviously, you know, you lose your pollinator, and what do? Like, you have a bunch of introduced insects that come down here and rob your nectar, and then you don't have anything to offer to any of the few birds that are left. So this could be something that's, you know, taking a while to die out, but we're definitely seeing that happen. Okay, and then I also wanted to mention that there are 4 species of land birds that are surviving in the northwestern Hawaiian Islands. There used to be 7, but the Laysan millerbird over here went extinct. The Laysan rail, which was this super cute, I really hope Molly shows it to you. Rails are usually like about this big. This was such a little guy. The first time she showed it to me in the collection, I was just super surprised. So that went extinct, and then the Laysan apapane here went extinct after this dude who was mining guano on Laysan Island thought it was a good idea to bring his whole family up there, and then to introduce rabbits. And so the rabbits denuded the island and caused the extinction of these 3 birds and an unknown number of plants and invertebrates. But these 4 species remain: the Laysan finch, Manoa finch, Manoa millerbird, and Laysan duck. I'm trying really hard to get them translocated so they persist on at least 2 islands. And then the last thing I wanted to mention is that few tourists ever encounter a native songbird, unless they go looking for them. And that's because these songbirds are confined in the upper levels of the forest. Here is an example, apapane, which is one of those couple of birds that's doing really well, that's actually resistant to avian malaria, or showing some resistance. This is an example of their range. Exactly, there it is. And so you can see it's confined to the highest ridges on all the islands. And that distribution is driven by the range of mosquitoes which transmit avian malaria. And it's hard for me to highlight the significance of avian malaria, which has likely driven a lot of those other species to extinction, and is likely going to drive all but 3 species to extinction now, unless we do something about mosquitoes in the Hawaiian Islands. Mosquitoes are not native to the Hawaiian Islands, if we can find a way to eradicate them from the island, we should do it. So in summary, Hawaii provided a really unique environment that encouraged rapid evolutionary divergence. Many of the birds are single island endemics. 70% are extinct. Many are important pollinators, and most of them are range limited into upper elevations. And so here are pictures of not all of them, obviously, but a lot of them. I think almost every one of these is a single island endemic. The next ones that we are likely to lose are the Akekeke and Akikii, right here, these two. Unless we do something about the mosquitoes, those will probably be extinct within 10 years.
They're on Kauai, which is the lowest line of the main island, so.
And so now I wanted to play a few songs. So starting with EEB, also known as Beaker. And we hear these songs like, I'm a biologist, like I'm in the field all the time, and I hear these songs so rarely. When I was listening to them this morning, I was like, oh. So this is a bird that used to also be common on Oahu, and now is like, there's a sighting once every 5 years or something. It's very unlikely that it's breeding on this island.
The slide you had before, we had all the native birds. If you look, I think for the most part, they're all in native vegetation. The plants are in bad shape, but I often think that the birds, like the whole canary and coal mine, they are an indicator of what's happening to the forest. It's happening really fast with the birds. And so I don't know, I just kind of draw that they are an indicator of a much bigger thing.
Yeah.
That's going on.
But I do think for some species, such as Amakihi, which is right here, I feel like this species would be down in coastal strand vegetation if it could get down there. If there weren't mosquitoes down there. But I think you're right, like in a lot of cases, the species need very specific habitat, but not all cases. Okay, the next song I'd like to play is
Kauai
the Kauai Elapaio.
Call and song.
Squeaky toy.
Kauai Elapaio. Call.
Contact calls between a male and a female, probably.
The female still has vocal,
But just doesn't have a song. And this bird's a flycatcher. You can kind of see like the little hairs around the bill, which are used by most flycatchers to feel what's happening right around there.
Biologists distinguish between calls and songs. So calls are just these noises that they make back and forth. They might chirp, chirp, chirp as they're hopping from tree to tree, and there's different purposes. Song is usually associated with reproduction, and so there are some birds that duet, so you'll hear the oh duet. But
that's really rare to
pretty rare.
have females sing,
Do we know, are the birds social with each other, or are they kind of independent with their pairs? Like social among their species or among other species?
So some species like Manoa finch is social with itself, with its own species. And you will see flocks, like mixed species flocks, but we don't really know, how dependent upon each other they are. Like on the mainland, you have those wintering mixed species flocks, that there's some evidence that there's increased survival when you're in a group like that because you can alert other organisms, when there's a predator around. But we don't have evidence like that in Hawaii.
I actually have something to add. In one of my first meetings with Molly here, she mentioned that she has a colleague on Kauai who works in the high elevation forest where a lot of these species are sort of like the last vestige of the Akikii, the Akekee, all these species. She said that her colleague, who's very familiar, who works in the forest out there for decades, now cannot distinguish the colors of the akikiki and the akeke. Because his theory is that because they're so limited in their range, they've been forced into these mixed species flocks, and now there's almost like a loss, you can think about loss of a language, a loss of these birds' unique vocalizations. That's something you should definitely ask Molly about, because that was the first I heard of it, and it was really interesting, and it speaks to that sort of like incredible isolation that's occurring more and more, right? And forcing these birds in close contact, and now they have to flock together. Anyway, something that.
Okay, just two more, real quick.
Oh wow.
You have to listen to this.
Oh, yeah.
So this is not a crow, like I said, it's a raven. And it makes a lot of weird noises.
Alright, the aggression call, if you're ready for that one.
Okay, and then the very last one. This is the Kauai o'o, which was last heard in 1987. My advisor, Sheila Conant, was on this trip.
Kauai
That's her talking. Rob Schellenberger made this recording.
Song 1.
Yeah, I was still in high school then. You can see that bird.
You want to hear the duet recording as well?
Smart.
Say it again.
Sounds smart.
And so those little yellow feathers on its legs are one of the things that make Hawaiian birds.
The last.
They just throw a lot of birds.
We don't really know. I can't speak to that really.
That should
Some
be a
of
lot
those were
of.
sacrificed. If I remember correctly, the Apapani and the Iwi, a lot of those were sacrificed for the feather cake making because the whole bird was red. So that's why they were red feathers. Now the yellow feathers, those were a little more special because there were a lot fewer yellow feathers, like racial-wise.
Yeah.
So you see the Kauai o'o, there's a few other o'o species of mammal that have yellow feathers, but they're usually just in like tufts behind the legs, on the wing fringes. I believe it's Kamehameha the First, his ahu'ula, his feather cape, is all yellow. It's all yellow. And I think they have it.
Amakihi or Akiapula'au.
I'm pretty sure that's a species that's always listed when they talk about the species. It's usually o'o or the mammal. So check out that feather cape. It's incredible. It takes 100 years to make one of those things.
They didn't do any catch and release like coincidence.
For those ones
Yeah.
they might have, and that's one of the things my lab has done is partnered with people who go into and read the Hawaiian newspapers that captured a lot of stories about this kind of stuff so we can get a better idea of that.
But that wasn't what drove these species to
No.
extinction. It was more
It's
of
the
the
rats.
habitat alteration and invasive, and the mosquitoes. And this is a baby Nihoa miller bird.
Sheldon's background has been in helping, she pioneered the translocation, so one of the things you're almost guaranteed to see extinction when you're down to a single population, because a single hurricane, a single disease, a single something can wipe them out. So your first step usually, if you only have one population left, is to say, how do I get a second population so I have some insurance? And so Sheldon pioneered doing a translocation of the miller birds, so that we'd have a second population on a different island, replacing an extinct population of a sister species, so that you could reduce extinction. So she has a special place in her heart.
Yeah, this is one of the new populations.
Do the mosquitoes carry all kinds of diseases?
Yeah, so I mean, so in Hawaii, there's 8 introduced mosquito species. 6 of them are biting mosquitoes, and I think only 3 of them can spread disease. But only 1 of them is affecting the birds. But all 3 of them actually can transmit human diseases.
And
Oh,
they're
no,
not
human
all
disease to
diseases.
humans.
Okay.
Yeah, but only 1 of them is spreading to the birds. So that's where it gets complicated when you start talking about how to deal with that.
And then one other thing I just wanted to read, so I posted on Facebook last night, I was like, hey, if you are a bird nerd, what would you think is interesting about Hawaii's forest birds? And one of my friends, she's an outreach specialist, this is what she said when I told her that you all were artists and composers. She said, you know, the idea of adaptive radiation, which is what this is, feels very musical to me somehow. The idea that you start one place and then spin out variations on a theme while building complexity and diversity. And then the converse, as species are lost and go extinct, and you have a complex tapestry that now has all of these gaps in it. So I just wanted to share that. That was Holly Richards.
Yeah, it's funny because I talked a little with her too, and that's the thing, and I don't know actually the timelines of how they all went extinct, but when you think about this mosaic over the landscape, I mean, there's this whole invasion biology, so I guess as the disease went, you started having things blink out, and I don't know if it was a species at a time, but when I was thinking that, as far as the composition, you have birds that enter the scene, and then you have birds that exit the
That's
stage,
right.
kind of like at different times.
And this shows some of the, just the timing on a few species.
How about flightless geese? They must arrive with some people, obviously, in boats, right?
Or maybe their ancestor was flighted. So maybe their ancestor was like a Canada
So we
goose
don't know.
and then lost its ability to fly because once you got here, flying, it costs a lot energetically. And so if you don't need it, you might evolve the loss of flight over time. And we've seen that happen on Pacific Islands and a lot of places.
The genetics show that it's most closely related to the Canada goose, if I'm remembering correctly. So it probably was, people didn't arrive to the Hawaiian Islands until 1,500 years ago. 1,500 years. We've lost all of this in 1,500 years. It's just crazy.
Yeah, and so this is the skull of the Manoa, the giant flightless goose. This one was from its Pubaba, yeah.
And one question about the picture right before when you showed us this,
Uh-oh. Wait.
those stitches like from the one species of bird.
Oh, yeah, the
like,
radiation,
the radiation. What's approximate timeline from this one little bird to
So they
become
came,
the 27 different?
so do you know the answer to this as a geneticist? I mean, because I read a little bit of it in Pratt's book last night, and it was like, it's within the last 6 million years. But I am not.
Oahu's only 5.9 million. The age of the whole island for Oahu is 5.9 million.
Okay, so Pratt had something else in his book. He thought
Yeah.
it was older. The book was from like
Oahu's
the 90s.
3.2, yeah?
Oahu's 3.
Oahu's
Kauai's just
3.2.
over 5.
Hawaii's 5.
This,
So-
so this is.
Yeah, that,
So just say millions of years.
so it's,
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
little picture, that's million.
So, for example, something that's native to the Big Island's only 0.59 million years old. So it would have to arrive and
And then
diverge
time, yeah.
within that time. So,
So it's fast, and you see that in a lot of insects as well. Crickets,
The tree
weevils, tree
Visually-
snails. Oh yeah.
visually, yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, I spent like 5 years researching them. So, but the tree snails, like from an artist's perspective, oh,
They're
man,
beautiful.
they're incredible. Like reds and blues, but
Yeah.
not blues. Well, there's one.
Kind of, yeah.
Greens, yellows, they're beautiful.
It's true, they're very pretty, but I would argue that the weevils are cooler, but.
Just check here. Does the Fish Museum still have that great shell display? I think it's like.
Oh, yeah!
It's like right around the corner. Like,
No, the shell, if you go up to the collections,
Okay, so
it's
that one.
floor to ceiling, this size
Yeah,
of room,
yeah,
with
sure.
drawers, this shallow, filled with tree snail shells.
So yeah,
Yeah.
yes,
What about the birds that we see, like I just see when I'm walking around
like the
now?
shama or the northern cardinal, which came from the east coast of the
The
US.
one that looks really mean, that's like the black.
The red-vented bulbul, is that what she's
Yeah.
thinking about?
Yeah.
Oh, no, she's thinking about the mynah
It's the
bird.
bird with this haircut.
Yeah, the mynah.
Mynahs, yeah.
Mynahs came from,
They're Southeast Asia, like India.
So they just fly, they're just like.
No, those are mostly introductions.
Yeah.
So where all these birds kind of got here on their own,
Mhm.
They got
everything, you gotta think now, like so many species are getting introduced now, and it's all because we're introducing through our commodities,
They're like
people,
boats that come
through boats,
in.
people, there's just so much commodities are coming in.
but the native, or the introduced birds are a step more interesting, because if you look back at old papers, like in the early 1900s or late 1800s, I think, they'll say, is anyone traveling to a place with pretty birds? Because avian malaria had already wiped out all the birds in the lowlands, so there was nothing singing.
It was
So-
silent.
So people were like, if you're going somewhere with a cool bird, bring them back.
There
You
were
know-
whole societies dedicated to introducing birds in the early 1900s.
To here?
Yes.
Here,
All over the
because
place, yeah.
they woke up and it was quiet. You know, you wake up in the
would
morning,
be
you at least
depressing.
hear the white rump.
Did you ever see the like I guess the pigeons or the doves or?
All
All
of those are
introduced.
introduced.
All
And-
introduced.
And actually, like, so on some of the papers that I was reading, I mean, people would be in their plantation house or whatever in the lowlands, and they wrote or they talked about they would hear things. I mean, they would see these birds coming down and then they actually saw them like in their time period.